The transport ship shook as it entered the atmosphere of Vorthak, and Lihanna gripped her seat tighter as she looked out the small window at the dark planet below. The world looked angry with its red skies and jagged mountains that reached up like claws, trying to scratch the belly of their ship. Ambassador Park Min-ho sat across from her reading reports on his tablet, but she could see the worry lines around his eyes getting deeper with each passing hour. "Remember what I told you about these aliens?" Park said, without looking up from his screen. "The Krillians respect only strength, and they think we humans are weak because we are small compared to them." Hana nodded and adjusted the diplomatic badge on her gray uniform. She had been chosen for this mission because of her language skills and her ability to stay calm under pressure, but Park did not know about her other skills yet. The skills she had learned in the special forces before becoming a diplomat. Skills that involved breaking things much bigger than herself. Dr. Song Mira looked up from her medical equipment and shook her head. "I still cannot believe how big they are according to these files. Some of them are over 10 feet tall and their bones are 3 times denser than ours. Their skin is like armor plating." Kim Ji-soo, the team biologist, was studying alien anatomy charts on her computer. "Look at these muscle fibers," she said, pointing at the screen. "A single Krillian could probably lift a small car over their head without much effort." Choi Daeho, their military escort, checked his sidearm for the 3rd time since they had entered Krillian space. "The intelligence reports say they have conquered 47 worlds in the last century, and they did it all through brute force. No fancy weapons or technology, just raw physical power." The ship touched down with a heavy thump on the landing platform, and through the windows, they could see their welcoming committee. 6 Krillian guards stood in formation, each one massive and covered in what looked like natural armor plating that grew from their skin. Their heads were elongated and their eyes glowed with a pale yellow light. They carried weapons that looked more like clubs than anything sophisticated. "Stay close to me and do not speak unless spoken to," Park warned as the airlock cycled open. "We are here to negotiate a trade agreement, not to start a war." The moment they stepped off the ship, the difference in size became very clear. The smallest Krillian guard was at least 8 feet tall and probably weighed 4 times what Hana did. They looked down at the human delegation like adults looking at small children, and Hana could see the mixture of amusement and contempt in their glowing eyes. The lead guard spoke in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "I am Commander Vexmar, and you will follow me to the palace. Do not touch anything and do not wander off. This world is dangerous for such small creatures." They were loaded into a transport vehicle that was clearly not designed for human-sized passengers. Hana had to stand on her toes to see out the windows as they drove through the alien city. The buildings were massive and built from some kind of dark stone that seemed to absorb light. Everything was sized for beings much larger than humans, and she felt like she was in a world built for giants. The Krillian palace rose from the center of the city like a mountain made of black metal and stone. Spires twisted up into the red sky, and defensive walls surrounded the complex. Guard towers held massive weapons that could probably level city blocks, and Hana counted at least 50 armed Krillians just in the courtyard they drove through, inside the palace. The ceilings were so high they disappeared into shadows, and the hallways were wide enough for several Earth vehicles to drive side by side. Tapestries hung from the walls, showing scenes of Krillian warriors defeating various alien species in battle. Hana noticed that in every image, the Krillians were shown as much larger than their enemies. They were brought to a great hall, where Warlord Thexvar sat on a throne that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of black stone. The Warlord himself was enormous, even by Krillian standards, standing at least 11 feet tall with scars crisscrossing his armored hide. His eyes fixed on the human delegation, and his mouth open to show teeth like broken glass. "So these are the humans," Thexvar said, and his voice echoed through the hall. "I have heard stories about your species, but I find it hard to believe such small, weak creatures could build ships that travel between stars." Park stepped forward and performed the bow that their cultural briefings had taught them. "Great Warlord, we come seeking friendship between our peoples and hoping to establish trade that will benefit both our civilizations." A younger Krillian emerged from behind the throne, and Hana immediately knew this had to be the Warlord's son. He was nearly as tall as his father, but his armor plating was still growing in and had the bright coloration of youth. His movements were quick and aggressive, and when he looked at the humans, his eyes showed nothing but contempt. "Father, why do we waste time with these creatures?" the young Krillian said. "They are so small and weak-looking I could probably break all 5 of them with one hand." "This is my son Krelthan," Thexvar said with obvious pride. "He is the champion of his generation and has never lost a battle. Perhaps you humans would like to see a demonstration of Krillian strength." Before Park could respond, Krelthan had moved to a nearby pillar, and with casual ease he punched straight through the stone, leaving a hole the size of a dinner plate. Chunks of rock fell to the floor and the sound echoed through the hall. The other Krillians watching made sounds that Hana assumed were approving. "Impressive," Park said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But we humans believe that true strength comes from working together and using our minds to solve problems." Krelthan laughed, and the sound was like metal scraping against metal. "Working together means nothing when you are facing an enemy that could step on your entire army. Your minds mean nothing if you cannot defend yourselves." The negotiations that followed were a disaster from the beginning. Every offer the humans made was met with dismissal or outright mockery. When Park suggested technological exchange, the Krillians laughed and said they had no use for toys made by weaklings. When Dr. Song offered medical knowledge, they replied that only the weak needed medicine. "You speak of trade as equals." Thexvar finally said, "But equals must be able to defend what they have earned. What could creatures like you possibly defend?" Against beings like us, Hana watched as Park's diplomatic training warred with his growing frustration. The ambassador was good at his job, but he was not prepared for negotiations where the other side saw his entire species as insects. "Perhaps," Krelthan said suddenly, "we should test whether these humans are worthy of our time at all. I challenge one of them to single combat, according to the ancient laws. If they can prove they are not completely helpless, maybe we will listen to their words." The great hall fell silent, and Hana could feel every Krillian eye in the room turning to look at the human delegation. Park's face had gone pale, and she could see sweat starting to form on his forehead. "Surely there must be another way to prove our worth," Park said carefully. "Perhaps a test of knowledge or problem-solving. Knowledge means nothing without the strength to protect it." Krelthan replied, "The law is clear. If you wish to be treated as equals, you must prove you can fight as equals." Thexvar leaned forward on his throne. "The challenge has been issued according to our most sacred traditions. You may accept or you may leave our world immediately and never return." Hana looked at her teammates and saw the fear in their eyes. Choi was a soldier, but even he knew that human military training would mean nothing against a creature that could punch through stone with its bare hands. Dr. Song was shaking her head slightly, and Kim looked like she might be sick. "We accept," Hana said quietly, and every head in the room turned to stare at her. "Hana." "No," Park whispered. "You cannot be serious," but she was already stepping forward and looking up at the massive form of Krell. "Then, I accept your challenge," she said louder, so her voice carried through the hall. The reaction was immediate. The Krillians burst into laughter that sounded like an avalanche, and even Thexvar was shaking his head in what might have been amusement. "This small female thinks she can fight our greatest warrior." One of the guards called out, "Perhaps we should get her a ladder so she can reach high enough to surrender." Krelthan looked down at Hana like she was an interesting insect. "Are you certain, little human? I would not want to accidentally kill you before you have a chance to scream." Hana met his glowing eyes without flinching. "I am certain. When do we fight?" The human delegation was given quarters in what the Krillians probably considered a guest wing, but felt more like a prison to Hana. The rooms were huge and cold, with furniture that was sized for beings twice their height. She had to climb onto the bed like it was a small mountain, and the chairs required her to dangle her feet like a child. Park paced back and forth across their common room, his diplomatic composure finally cracking. "What were you thinking, Hana? That creature could tear you in half without breaking a sweat? Do you want to die on this miserable planet?" "I was thinking that we came here to establish relations with these aliens, and the only way they will respect us is if we prove we are not helpless," Hana replied calmly as she examined the lock on their door. It was massive and clearly designed to keep much stronger beings contained. There has to be another way, Dr. Song said, wringing her hands. Maybe we could fake some kind of medical emergency or claim diplomatic immunity. Choi shook his head. I have read their cultural files. Once a challenge is issued, it cannot be withdrawn without bringing dishonor to both sides. If Hana backs down now, they will see it as proof that all humans are cowards. Kim was studying her tablet again, scrolling through anatomical data. The physical differences are just too extreme. An average Krillian has muscle density that is 3 times greater than peak human athletes. Their bone structure can withstand impacts that would shatter our skeletons. I know what I am doing, Hana said quietly, and something in her tone made the others stop talking and look at her. Park, you never asked me why I left the military to become a diplomat. The ambassador frowned. Your file said you wanted a career change after your service ended. Something about wanting to build bridges instead of burning them. Hana smiled, but there was no humor in it. That is the official story. The real story is that my commanding officers decided I was too dangerous for regular military operations. They transferred me to diplomatic corps, hoping I would find a less violent way to serve my country. Too dangerous? Song asked. But you are so small and quiet. You barely speak during briefings. Small does not mean helpless, Hana replied. I spent 8 years in special operations learning how to fight opponents who were bigger and stronger than me. Terrorists do not usually send their smallest members to plant bombs or take hostages. She moved to the window and looked out at the courtyard, below where Krillian guards were practicing combat drills. They moved like walking tanks, relying entirely on brute force and direct attacks. Their technique was crude but devastatingly effective against anything that tried to meet them head-on. The problem with beings who have always been the strongest is that they never learn to fight smart, she continued. Look at them down there. Every attack is a straight line. Every defense assumes their armor will protect them. They have never faced an enemy who could not match their physical power. Park joined her at the window. You really think you can defeat that monster? I think I can survive long enough to show these aliens that humans are not helpless prey, Hana said, and maybe that will be enough to earn their respect. Kim was still studying her data. If you are serious about this, then we need to understand everything we can about Krillian physiology. Their armor plating is not uniform, and there might be weak points we can identify. For the next 3 days, the human team worked around the clock studying their hosts. Kim used her biological training to map Krillian anatomy, while Dr. Song analyzed their medical scans looking for vulnerabilities. Choi gathered intelligence on their combat techniques, and Park tried to find any legal loopholes that might help them. Hana spent her time observing. She watched the guards during their shift changes, noting how they moved and where their armor was thickest. She studied Krelthin when he visited their quarters to mock them, learning his preferred attack patterns and fighting stance. Most importantly, she watched for signs of overconfidence. The young Krillian prince was exactly what she had expected. He was strong and fast and completely convinced of his own superiority. He had never faced a real challenge in his life and had no idea how to adapt when his usual tactics failed. The armor plating is thickest on their chest and shoulders, Kim reported on the second day, but it gets thinner at the joints, especially where the limbs connect to the torso. There are also gaps at the base of the skull and along the spine. Their balance is all wrong for their size, Choi added. They are top-heavy and rely on their mass to stay upright. If you could somehow get one off balance, they would have trouble recovering quickly. Dr. Song had been studying nerve pathways and pressure points. The interesting thing is that their nervous system is actually more complex than ours in some ways. They have nerve clusters at specific points that seem to control major muscle groups. If you could disrupt those signals, you would need incredible precision, Park interrupted, and you would have to get close enough to touch him without being crushed first, Hana nodded. I have been thinking about that. The challenge will take place in their arena, which means there will be rules and ceremonies. Krillians love their traditions, which means Krelthin will want to make a show of defeating me. He will not try to end the fight immediately, word of. The upcoming challenge had spread throughout the Krillian city, and by the third day, crowds were gathering outside the palace. The local news broadcasts showed experts discussing how quickly the human would be defeated, with most estimates ranging from 5 to 30 seconds. The betting was heavily one-sided, with odds of 1,000 to 1 against the human lasting more than a minute. Some Krillians were wagering on whether she would be killed instantly or merely crippled for life. Others debated whether humans made interesting sounds when they were being crushed. Hana tried not to think about the crowds as she went through her preparation routine. She had found a quiet corner of their quarters where she could practice her forms without drawing attention. The movements were subtle and precise, focusing on pressure points and joint manipulation rather than powerful strikes. "The arena challenge is tomorrow," Park said on the evening of the third day. "Are you absolutely certain about this? We could still find a way to withdraw gracefully." "The time for withdrawal is past," Hana replied. "Besides, I want to see if these Krillians are as tough as they think they are." That night she barely slept, not because of fear, but because her mind was going over every detail of what she had learned. Krelthin was strong and fast, but he was also predictable. He had grown up believing that size and strength were the only things that mattered in combat. Tomorrow she would teach him that there were other kinds of strength. Kim knocked softly on her door just before dawn. "I have been working on something that might help," she whispered as she slipped into the room. "I created a detailed map of Krillian nerve clusters and pressure points. If you could memorize these locations," Hana studied the diagrams carefully, noting the precise positions where human fingers might be able to disrupt alien nervous systems. It was risky and would require perfect timing, but it was possible. "There is something else," Kim added. "I noticed that their armor plating has a growth pattern similar to Earth reptiles. The newer sections are actually softer than the older ones. Krelthin is young, which means parts of his armor are still developing." "Where?" Hana asked immediately. Kim pointed to specific areas on the diagram. "Lower back near the spine and along the sides where the ribcage connects. The plating there should be significantly thinner than on an older Krillian." It was not much, but it might be enough. Hana spent the remaining hours before dawn memorizing the locations and practicing the precise strikes she would need. Her movements had to be perfect because she would only get one chance. As the sun rose over Vorthak, the arena began to fill with spectators. Thousands of Krillians came to watch what they expected to be a brief and entertaining execution. News crews set up cameras to broadcast the event across the Empire so that other species could see what happened to those who challenged Krillian supremacy. Hana, dressed carefully in her simple combat fatigues. No armor or weapons were allowed. In the arena, according to Krillian law, it would be flesh against flesh and skill against strength. She checked her appearance in the mirror one last time and was satisfied with what she saw. She looked exactly like what the Krillians expected, a weak and helpless human. "Whatever happens out there," Park said as they prepared to leave for the arena, "know that you have already proven something important. You have shown that humans will not back down from a challenge even when the odds are impossible." Hana smiled. "The odds are only impossible if you try to fight their fight." "But I am not going to fight like a Krillian." The walk to the arena felt like a funeral procession with Krillian guards escorting them through corridors lined with spectators who pointed and laughed at the tiny human who thought she could challenge their champion. Some called out suggestions for how Krelthin should kill her, while others debated whether she would even be able to land a single blow. The arena itself was a massive circular structure carved from black stone with seating for over 50,000 spectators. The fighting floor was simple dirt surrounded by walls too high for anyone to climb out. There were no weapons or obstacles, just empty space where two beings would fight until one could not continue. As they entered the arena, the crowd noise was deafening. The arena fell completely silent as the ancient referee raised his clawed hand into the air. 50,000 Krillian spectators held their breath waiting for what they believed would be the shortest fight in arena history. In the royal box, Warlord Thexavar leaned forward on his throne, eager to see his son demonstrate the superiority of their species to the entire galaxy. Hana stood perfectly still in the center of the fighting circle, her hands relaxed at her sides, and her breathing slow and controlled. She had entered the mental state that her instructors had called the quiet place, where time seemed to slow down, and every detail became crystal clear. She could hear Krelthin's heavy breathing, see the slight tremor in his left leg. That meant he was preparing to charge, and smell the metallic scent of his excitement. Krell then bounced on his toes and rolled his massive shoulders, showing off for the cameras that were broadcasting this moment across the Krillian Empire. He had fought dozens of opponents in his young life and crushed them all with overwhelming force. This tiny human female would be no different, except that her defeat would be witnessed by billions and serve as a warning to any species that dared to challenge Krillian might. Begin! The referee shouted and dropped his hand Krell, then exploded, forward like a living avalanche, his armored feet pounding craters in the dirt floor of the arena. His charge was everything Hana had expected, straightforward and devastating with enough force behind it to smash through a stone wall. The crowd roared its approval as their champion closed the distance to his helpless victim in 3 massive strides. But when Krellthan reached the spot where Hana had been standing, she was no longer there. The human had moved at the last possible, second sliding to her left with liquid grace that seemed impossible for such a small being. Krellthan's momentum carried him past her, and he stumbled slightly as his massive fist punched nothing but empty air. For the first time in his life, he had missed a target, and the confusion showed clearly on his face. The crowd's roar faltered as they tried to understand what had just happened. Their champion had charged like he always did, but somehow the tiny human had avoided being crushed. It should have been impossible for anything that small to move fast enough to escape Krellthan's attack. Hana was already moving before the alien prince could recover from his missed charge. She flowed around behind him like water moving around a rock, and her hands found the precise spots that Kim had mapped for her. 3 fingers pressed into specific points along Krellthan's lower spine, where his armor plating was thinner and his nerve clusters were exposed. The effect was immediate and shocking. Krellthan's legs simply stopped working as if someone had cut the wires controlling them. The massive warrior crashed face-first into the dirt, his own momentum driving him down while his lower body refused to obey his commands. The sound of his impact shook the entire arena and sent up a cloud of dust that temporarily obscured him from view. When the dust cleared, the sight that greeted 50,000 spectators was beyond their ability to comprehend. Their greatest champion, the pride of Krillian youth and the heir to a warrior dynasty, was lying motionless in the dirt, while a human female barely half his size stood calmly beside his fallen form. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a single voice could be heard in the vast arena, as every Krillian brain tried to process what their eyes were showing them. It was not possible. It could not have happened. Their champion did not lose, and certainly not to a creature so small. She could have hidden behind his leg Krell, then tried to push himself up with his arms, but his legs remained completely limp and unresponsive. Panic began to show in his glowing eyes as he realized that something was very wrong with his body. He had never experienced anything like this paralysis and had no idea what the human had done to him. "What?" he gasped, struggling to form words. "What did you do to me?" Hana knelt beside the fallen prince, and her voice was gentle, almost motherly. "I disrupted the nerve signals that control your leg muscles. The paralysis is temporary and will wear off in about an hour. You are not permanently injured." She looked up at the royal box where Warlord Thexvar sat frozen on his throne, his mouth hanging open in shock. When she spoke again, her voice carried clearly through the silent arena. "Great Warlord your son is, a brave warrior, but he has never learned to fight an opponent who cannot match his strength. This is not a weakness in him, but a gap in his training." The crowd finally found its voice, and the reaction was chaos. Some Krillians shouted accusations of trickery or poison, while others demanded to know what sorcery the human had used. Several fights broke out in the stands, as different factions argued about what they had witnessed. Dr. Song was already running onto the arena floor with her medical bag, despite the protests of Krillian guards who tried to stop her. She reached Krellthan and immediately began examining his condition while explaining to the Krillian physicians what had happened. The human targeted specific nerve clusters that control motor function in the lower extremities, she said as she ran a scanner over the prince's spine. It is a technique that requires precise knowledge of anatomy and perfect timing, but it is not magic or poison. It is simply applied knowledge. More human team members entered the arena as the Krillian guards seemed too stunned to stop them. Kim brought her tablet with the anatomical charts, while Choi positioned himself to protect the others if the crowd decided to riot. Park moved toward the royal box, trying to salvage some kind of diplomatic victory from this impossible situation. "You see," Hana said to the Krillian physicians who had gathered around their fallen prince, Your species has incredible physical strength and natural armor, but like all biological systems, you have points of vulnerability. We humans have studied anatomy and pressure points for thousands of years because we often had to fight opponents larger than ourselves. One of the older Krillian doctors was examining Kim's charts with obvious fascination. These diagrams show nerve pathways that our own medical knowledge had not fully mapped. How did your species learn such precise anatomical details? Through necessity? Hana replied. When you are smaller and weaker than your enemies, you must become smarter and more precise. Every human child learns that knowledge and skill can overcome brute force if applied correctly. Krelthin was listening to this exchange with growing amazement. As sensation slowly began to return to his legs, he realized that this small human had not only defeated him, but had done so without causing permanent harm. She could have crippled him for life or even killed him, but had chosen to use exactly the amount of force needed to win. You could have hurt me much worse, he said quietly. Why did you hold back? Because the goal was not to destroy you, but to prove that humans are not helpless prey. Hana answered, showing mercy after victory is also a form of strength. In the royal box, Warlord Thexvar was having a heated discussion with his advisors. Some were calling for the human to be executed for using forbidden techniques, while others argued that no rules had been broken. The challenge had been fought according to ancient law, and the human had won fairly, even if her methods were incomprehensible. The techniques she used are not forbidden because we never imagined they were possible. One advisor pointed out, our laws assume that victory comes through superior strength, not through superior knowledge. Ambassador Park seized the moment to address the warlord directly. Great leader, what you have witnessed today is not the defeat of your son, but a demonstration of what humans can offer as allies. We do not seek to conquer through force, but to share knowledge that benefits all civilized species. The crowd was gradually settling down as news crews interviewed spectators and tried to make sense of what had happened. Some Krillians were angry and demanded a rematch, while others were curious about these strange humans who fought with precision instead of power. Krell then was able to sit up now with feeling returning to his legs, though he would need help standing for several more minutes. He looked at Hana with something that might have been respect. I have never been defeated before. No opponent has ever survived my first charge, let alone turned my own strength against me. Your strength is impressive, Hana replied, but strength without understanding becomes a weakness when facing an intelligent enemy. The humans who sent me here learned that lesson long ago when we had to fight creatures much larger than ourselves. Dr. Song finished her examination and announced that Krelthin would make a complete recovery with no lasting effects from his temporary paralysis. The Krillian physicians were amazed by the precision of the technique and began asking detailed questions about human medical knowledge as the arena slowly emptied and the immediate crisis passed. Park found himself in the unexpected position of negotiating from strength. The Krillians could no longer dismiss humans as helpless weaklings, now that they had seen one of their greatest warriors defeated by superior knowledge and technique. Perhaps, Warlord Thexvar said finally, we have underestimated your species. This demonstration has shown that there are forms of strength beyond physical power. Hana helped Krelthin to his feet, as full feeling returned to his legs, and the young prince tested his balance carefully. The crowd that remained in the arena watched in fascination as the tiny humans supported the massive alien warrior who towered over her. News of the impossible victory spread across the Krillian Empire faster than anyone could have imagined. Within hours of the arena fight, every major news network was broadcasting footage of the tiny human female defeating their greatest young warrior. The images were transmitted to dozens of worlds where conquered species watched in stunned silence as their supposedly invincible overlords were proven vulnerable. On the mining world of Kethvar, the blue-skinned Zenthari workers stopped their endless digging to gather around communication screens and watch the humans' victory over and over again. For 3 generations, they had believed that resistance against the Krillians was hopeless because no being in the galaxy could match their physical strength. Now they saw a creature smaller than themselves bringing down a Krillian champion with nothing but knowledge and precision. The reaction on Vorthak itself was even more dramatic. Krillian society had been built on the absolute certainty that physical strength determined worth and status. Seeing their prince defeated by an opponent who could not even lift his weapons challenged everything they believed about themselves and their place in the universe. Warlord Thexvar found himself facing the greatest crisis of his reign as various factions within his government demanded different responses to the shocking defeat. The military wanted the human executed for using forbidden techniques, while the scientific community begged for access to her knowledge. The diplomatic corps saw an opportunity, while the traditionalists called for isolation. The techniques she used are not forbidden because they were unknown to us, the chief medical officer reported during an emergency council session. Our laws governing combat assume that victory comes through superior strength or endurance. We never considered that an opponent might target our nervous system directly. General Koramas slammed his armored fist on the council table. This is exactly why we should eliminate these humans before their poison spreads further. If other species learn these techniques, our military advantage will be compromised. Our advantage has already been compromised, replied Science Director Velthara. Every species that saw this broadcast now knows that Krillians can be defeated. We can either learn from these humans or watch as others use their knowledge against us. Meanwhile, in the human quarters, Ambassador Park was dealing with his own crisis as messages poured in from Earth demanding explanations for what had happened. The diplomatic corps had expected him to negotiate trade agreements, not stage a demonstration that would reshape galactic politics. How did you know you could defeat him? Park asked Hana for the 10th time since returning from the arena. And why did you not tell me about your special forces background before we left Earth? Hana was sitting quietly in the oversized chair, reviewing her tablet, while Dr. Song treated a small cut on her hand from where she had scraped against Krelthan's armor. I told you I could handle myself, and I did. The specific details of my training were classified until recently. Kim was monitoring Krillian communication networks and reporting on the growing chaos throughout their empire. 3 subject worlds have already declared independence, and 2 more are demanding renegotiation of their surrender terms. The Krillian military is mobilizing fleets to respond, but their troops seem demoralized. Choi nodded grimly. This is what happens when you build an empire entirely on fear and intimidation. The moment people realize you can be beaten, the whole structure starts to collapse. A soft knock on their door interrupted the discussion, and they were surprised to see Krelthan himself standing in the hallway. The young prince looked different. Somehow, smaller despite his massive size, and his usual arrogant confidence had been replaced by something that might have been humility. I request permission to speak with the human female who defeated me. He said formally. Park exchanged glances with his team before nodding. Please come in, Prince Krelthan. The massive alien had to duck to enter their quarters, and even then his head nearly touched the ceiling. He moved carefully as if afraid his bulk might accidentally damage something, and when he looked at Hana, his glowing eyes showed curiosity rather than contempt. I have spent the last 6 hours reviewing recordings of our fight, he began. I want to understand exactly what you did to me and how such a technique is possible. Hana gestured for him to sit, though the furniture was clearly not designed for his size. Your nervous system controls your muscle groups through electrical signals. By applying pressure to specific points, I was able to temporarily disrupt those signals. It is like cutting a wire that carries power to a machine. But how did you know where to strike? My armor should have protected those areas. Kim stepped forward. With her tablet showing the anatomical charts they had developed, we studied your species' physiology and identified weak points where your natural armor is thinner. Your youth actually worked against you because your armor plating is not fully developed yet. Krelthan examined the diagrams with growing amazement. You learned all of this in just 3 days? Our own medical specialists have studied Krillian anatomy for centuries, and they did not know about these nerve clusters. Sometimes an outside perspective can see things that internal experts miss. Dr. Song explained, human medicine has always focused on precision because we cannot rely on raw strength to overcome disease or injury. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Warlord Thexvar himself, accompanied by a full honor guard. The massive ruler had to force his way through the doorway, and his presence filled the already crowded room. His scarred face showed a mixture of anger and curiosity as he looked down at the humans. So these are the beings who have thrown my empire into chaos, he rumbled. Do you understand what you have done here, human? Ambassador Park stepped forward diplomatically. Great Warlord, we came seeking peaceful relations between our species. We never intended to cause instability in your empire. Peaceful relations, Thexvar repeated, yet your female warrior has demonstrated that our greatest strengths can be turned into weaknesses. Already my generals report that subject worlds are testing our resolve, and our enemies gather their fleets. Hana stood and faced the towering alien ruler without showing any sign of fear. What I demonstrated is that cooperation and knowledge sharing make both sides stronger. Your son is learning techniques that will make him a better warrior while we learn about Krillian's strength and honor. You speak of cooperation, but you have made us appear weak before the entire galaxy. No, Hana replied. Firmly, I showed that you were incomplete. There is a difference between weakness and having room for improvement. Thexvar stared down at her for a long moment before turning to his son. What is your assessment of these humans? Krelthen straightened to his full height. Father, they possess knowledge that could make our warriors more effective, and their healing techniques could save lives that we currently lose to training injuries. The female who defeated me did so without causing permanent harm, which shows both skill and mercy. Mercy is not a virtue in war. Perhaps not, but wisdom is, the young prince replied. These humans defeated me not through superior strength, but through superior understanding. If we could combine their knowledge with our power, we would be truly unstoppable. The warlord considered this while his advisors whispered among themselves. Finally, he nodded slowly. Very well. I am prepared to consider a formal alliance between our peoples, but there must be conditions. Park immediately went into diplomatic mode. What conditions would you require, Great Warlord? First, your people must share their fighting techniques with our military instructors. Second, you must provide medical knowledge to help us better understand our own physiology. Third, you must help us deal with the rebellions that your demonstration has inspired. And in return, Park asked, carefully, in return we offer you protection under Krillian law, access to our trade networks, and the resources of 47 worlds. We also guarantee that no Krillian force will ever move against human territory. It was an incredible offer far beyond what they had hoped to achieve when they first arrived on Vorthak. But Hana could see the calculation behind it. The Krillians needed human knowledge to maintain their empire, and they were willing to pay almost any price to get it. There is one more condition, Thexvar added. The female warrior must remain here to train our champions in her techniques. Absolutely not, Park said immediately. We cannot leave a member of our delegation as a hostage. Not a hostage, Krell then interjected, an honored teacher. She would have the rank of master instructor and full diplomatic immunity. Hana looked around the room at her teammates and saw the hope in their eyes. This mission had already succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, and now they were being offered the chance to establish humanity as a major player in galactic politics. I accept, she said quietly, but I want regular communication with Earth and the right to train human students alongside Krillian ones. Agreed. Thexvar replied, Let it be recorded that on this day a new alliance was forged between the Krillian Empire and the Human Republic. As news of the alliance spread throughout the galaxy, the balance of power began to shift in ways no one could have predicted. Species that had been conquered by brute force suddenly saw new possibilities, while the Krillians themselves began to understand that true strength came from combining physical power with intellectual achievement. 2 weeks after the arena fight that shocked the galaxy, Lee Hana stood in the Krillian Imperial War College, watching as 50 of their finest young warriors attempted to execute the basic human combat techniques she had been teaching them. The sight would have been amusing if it were not so important for the future of both their species. The massive alien students struggled with concepts that went against everything they had been taught since birth. Instead of relying on brute strength, they were learning to use their opponent's momentum against them. Instead of charging straight forward, they were practicing evasion and misdirection. Most challenging of all, they were learning to show restraint and precision rather than overwhelming force. Remember that your size is both an advantage and a disadvantage, Hana called out as she moved between the training pairs. An enemy who understands pressure points can use your mass against you just As I did to Prince Krelthin, Krelthin himself had become her most dedicated student, spending every available hour learning human fighting techniques and philosophy. The young prince, who had once believed that strength was the only thing that mattered, now understood that knowledge and wisdom were equally important in combat, Master Instructor. One of the younger Krillian warriors called out, "How is it possible for beings as small as humans to develop such effective fighting methods?" Hana paused her instruction to address the question that she had been asked dozens of times since beginning her teaching duties. Throughout human history, we have faced opponents larger and stronger than ourselves. Wild animals, natural disasters, and even other humans who had advantages we lacked. We learned that survival required intelligence, creativity, and the ability to turn weakness into strength. The student, a massive female named Kirasha, nodded thoughtfully. "So you developed these techniques because you had to, not because you chose to?" "Exactly," Hana replied. "Necessity forced us to become smarter and more precise. What you see as human weakness is actually the source of our strength." In another part of the palace complex, Dr. Song was working with Krillian medical specialists to establish the first joint research facility in the Empire's history. The combination of human precision and Krillian biological knowledge was already producing remarkable results that would benefit both species. The nerve mapping techniques your species developed could revolutionize how we treat spinal injuries, Dr. Velcran explained, as he reviewed Song's research data. "We have lost too many warriors to damage that your medicine could have prevented." Song nodded as she calibrated equipment that had been modified to work with alien physiology. Human medical knowledge evolved to help small, fragile beings survive in a dangerous universe. Those same techniques can help large, strong beings become even more resilient. Kim had established herself in the xenobiology department, where she was working to map the anatomy and pressure points of every species in the Krillian Empire. Her work would eventually allow human fighting techniques to be adapted for use against any potential enemy. Meanwhile, Ambassador Park found himself negotiating with representatives from dozens of worlds as news of the human-Krillian alliance spread throughout the galaxy. Species that had never heard of humanity suddenly wanted to establish diplomatic relations and trade agreements. The Zenthari Mining Collective is offering exclusive rights to their rare earth deposits in exchange for human medical technology. His aide reported during their daily briefing, "And the Veltorian Republic wants to hire human military advisors to help them develop new defense strategies." Park shook his head in amazement. "6 months ago, we were an unknown species begging for recognition. Now everyone wants to be our ally." The transformation was not limited to foreign relations. Within the Krillian Empire itself, the demonstration of human capabilities had sparked a renaissance of intellectual curiosity that was reshaping their entire culture. Young Krillians who had previously focused only on physical training were now studying anatomy, biology, and engineering with equal dedication. General Nam Woojin arrived from Earth, leading a follow-up mission that included military instructors, medical specialists, and technology experts. His shuttle landed in the same courtyard where Hana had first been dismissed as a weakling, but now he was greeted with full honors befitting an ally. "I have to admit," Woojin told Hana during their first meeting, "when we received your reports about defeating a Krillian champion, we thought you might be exaggerating. But seeing these warriors trying to learn our techniques makes it very real." Hana smiled as she watched Krelthin demonstrate a perfect joint lock on one of his training partners. They are fast learners once they accept that size is not everything. "The prince has already mastered techniques that took me months to perfect. What about resistance from traditionalists? I cannot imagine all Krillians are happy about learning from aliens." "There was some opposition at first," Hana admitted. "But results speak louder than prejudice. When warriors who have trained in human techniques consistently defeat those who rely only on strength, the argument becomes difficult to ignore." The changes were not limited to military applications. Krillian engineers were working with human designers to create equipment that emphasized precision over power, while their scientists collaborated on research projects that combined the best of both species' knowledge. Dr. Song had established a medical exchange program that brought young Krillian physicians to Earth while human doctors came to study alien biology. The cross-pollination of ideas was producing advances that neither species could have achieved alone. We are discovering that many diseases which affect Krillians could be treated using modified human techniques, Song reported during a joint medical conference. And human medicine is benefiting from Krillian knowledge of large-scale biological systems. The military applications were equally impressive. Krillian warriors who had completed human training were proving more effective in combat than their traditionally trained counterparts. They could defeat larger numbers of enemies while taking fewer casualties, and their improved precision was reducing collateral damage during conflicts. But perhaps the most significant change was philosophical. The Krillian obsession with individual strength was gradually giving way to an appreciation for teamwork knowledge, sharing, and collective improvement. Warriors who had once competed to prove their superiority were now working together to perfect new techniques. The old ways taught us that strength was everything, Krelthan explained to a gathering of young warriors. But Master Instructor Hana has shown us that true strength comes from understanding. A warrior who knows why something works is more powerful than one who only knows how to hit harder. Warlord Thexvar had become one of the strongest supporters of the human alliance as he watched his military become more effective and his empire become more stable. The rebellions that had erupted after Hana's victory were being handled more efficiently by warriors who could end conflicts quickly and precisely, rather than through massive destruction. The humans have given us something more valuable than weapons or technology, he told his council. They have given us a new way of thinking about strength and power. The formal signing of the Vorthak Accords took place in the same arena where Hana had defeated Krelthan just 1 month earlier. Representatives from dozens of worlds attended the ceremony, which established not only trade agreements, but mutual defense pacts and cultural exchange programs. As Hana stood beside Warlord Thexvar watching the various ambassadors sign the historic documents, she reflected on how much had changed since her arrival on this harsh alien world. What had begun as a desperate gamble to prove human worth had evolved into a partnership that would reshape galactic politics. "Do you ever regret accepting my challenge?" Krelthan asked as they watched the ceremony together. "Never," Hana replied. "Sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as impossible odds." The young prince who had once mocked humans as weaklings now wore the uniform of a master instructor himself, having earned the right to teach human techniques to other Krillian warriors. His transformation from arrogant champion to wise teacher symbolized the broader changes occurring throughout the Empire. As the ceremony concluded and the various delegations prepared to depart, Hana realized that her work was far from over. The techniques she had taught were already spreading to other worlds and species throughout the galaxy. Human fighting methods were being adapted for dozens of different alien physiologies, creating a new era of more precise and effective combat, but, more importantly, the philosophical concepts behind those techniques were taking root in cultures that had never questioned the supremacy of brute force. The idea that knowledge could triumph over strength, that precision could defeat power, and that wisdom was more valuable than weapons was spreading like wildfire through civilizations that had been stagnant for centuries. Dr. Song approached her. With a report from the latest medical conference, the Krillian physicians are requesting permission to establish a permanent research station on Earth. They want to study human adaptability in our natural environment. Kim added her own news. The Xenobiology Department has completed anatomical maps for 15 different species, and they are all requesting human military advisors to help develop new training programs. Even Choi had updates from the military cooperation programs.